UFC's Every Type of Finish Explained. There are exactly 47 different ways a UFC fight can end, and I'm about to show you every single one of them. From the classic knockout that sends someone to the shadow realm, to submissions so rare that most fighters have never even heard of them, to the bizarre disqualifications that make you question everything you know about combat sports. Listen, my little bird, I've been watching UFC since the days when there were no weight classes and no time limits. And if there's one thing that never gets old, it's watching a fight end in spectacular fashion. Whether it's a perfectly timed head kick, a slick submission that comes out of nowhere, or one of those weird technical stoppages that leaves everyone confused, every finish tells a story. Today we're breaking down every single way a UFC fight can end. The common ones, the rare ones, and the absolutely insane ones that happen maybe once in a decade. By the end of this video, you'll be able to watch any UFC event and sound like Joe Rogan explaining exactly what just happened. The big picture, finish statistics. Before we dive into the specific types, let's talk numbers. In 2024, only about 45% of UFC fights ended in a finish. That's the lowest finish rate in UFC history. The other 55% went to the judges' scorecards. But here's the thing. When fights do end early, they create the moments we remember forever. Section 1. Knockouts. The lights out spectacular. Let's start with the most exciting finish in all of combat sports, the knockout. This is when someone gets hit so hard that their brain basically hits the reset button and they go unconscious. The classic head kick KO. Nothing, and I mean nothing, gets a crowd on their feet like a perfectly timed head kick knockout. We're talking about Lyoto Machida's crane kick against Randy Couture, or Uriah Hall's spinning heel kick that literally broke Adam Seller's skull on The Ultimate Fighter. Head kick knockouts are rare. They make up less than 5% of all UFC finishes, but when they happen, they're instant classics. The setup, the timing, the sound of shin meeting skull. It's poetry in motion if poetry could give you a concussion. The overhand right bomb. This is the most common knockout punch in MMA. Think Chuck Liddell's signature shot, or more recently, Francis Ngannou turning people into memes with his overhand right. The overhand right works because it comes over the opponent's guard and lands on the temple or behind the ear, the perfect spots to shut down the central nervous system. The uppercut from hell. When someone ducks their head and walks into an uppercut, it's game over. The uppercut travels straight up through the chin, snapping the head back and scrambling the brain like Sunday morning eggs. Gabriel Gonzaga's uppercut knockout of Mirko Cro Cop Filipovic is still one of the most brutal knockouts in UFC history. The counter left hook. This is the thinking man's knockout. Your opponent throws a right hand, you slip to the side and counter with a left hook to the liver or the chin. Conor McGregor built his entire early career on this punch, and it's still one of the most effective knockout techniques in the sport. Body shot knockouts, the silent killers. Body shots don't get the respect they deserve, but a perfectly placed shot to the liver or solar plexus can drop someone just as fast as a headshot. The pain is so intense that your body just shuts down. Bas Rutten used to call liver shots the off switch, and he wasn't wrong. Section 2. Technical knockouts, when the ref says enough. A TKO is different from a knockout because the fighter is still conscious, but they can't defend themselves anymore. There are several ways this can happen. Referee stoppage, ground and pound. This is when someone gets taken down and just gets pounded into hamburger meat until the ref steps in. Think Tito Ortiz in his prime, or more recently Islam Makhachev's ground and pound game. The fighter isn't unconscious, but they're covering up and not fighting back, so the ref stops it to prevent further damage. Standing TKO, the walking dead. Sometimes a fighter gets hurt so badly that they're still standing, but they're not really there anymore. Their legs are gone, their hands are down, and they're just eating shots. The ref steps in because even though they're technically still fighting, they're defenseless. Doctor stoppage, medical TKO. This is when the ringside doctor looks at a cut, a broken nose, or some other injury and decides the fighter can't continue safely. The most famous example is probably the cut that ended the BJ Penn versus Matt Hughes fight, where Penn's corner couldn't stop the bleeding between rounds. Corner stoppage, throwing in the towel. This is when a fighter's corner decides their guy has taken enough punishment and stops the fight between rounds. It's rare in MMA because corners are usually more willing to let their fighters go out on their shield, but it happens. Chuck Liddell's corner stopped his fight against Rich Franklin to protect Chuck from further damage. Section 3. Submissions, the chess match of violence. Now we get to the technical stuff, submissions. This is where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, and pure technique take over. The rear naked choke, the king of submissions. This accounts for about 50% of all submission finishes in the UFC. It's the most basic and most effective submission in MMA. You get behind your opponent, wrap your arm around their neck, and squeeze until they go to sleep or tap out. Royce Gracie built his legend on this choke, and it's still ending fights today. The beauty of the rear naked choke is its simplicity. No fancy setups, no complex transitions, just pure leverage and physics. When it's locked in properly, you have about 8 to 10 seconds before you go unconscious. The guillotine choke, the sprawl and brawl special. This makes up about 21% of all UFC submissions. It's the perfect counter to a sloppy takedown attempt. When someone shoots for your legs with their head down, you wrap your arm around their neck and squeeze. Gray Maynard was a master of this, and it's still one of the most common submissions in MMA. The armbar, breaking arms and taking names. About 13% of UFC submissions are armbars. This is where you isolate your opponent's arm and hyperextend the elbow joint. If they don't tap, the arm breaks. Ronda Rousey made this submission famous in women's MMA, but it's been ending fights since the beginning of the sport. The armbar is beautiful because it can come from anywhere. Guard, mount, standing, scrambles. It's the Swiss Army knife of submissions. The triangle choke, the geometry of death. This is where you use your legs to create a triangle around your opponent's neck and arm, cutting off blood flow to the brain. It's one of the most technical submissions in MMA, requiring perfect positioning and timing. Anderson Silva's triangle choke of Kyle Sonnen is still one of the greatest comebacks in UFC history. Rare and exotic submissions. Now let's talk about the submissions that make highlight reels and break the internet. The twister. This is a spinal crank that looks like something out of a horror movie. Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie, hit the first twister in UFC history against Leonard Garcia, and it was so rare that Joe Rogan lost his mind on commentary. The Suloev stretch, named after Russian fighter Amar Suloev. This is a knee bar variation that attacks the knee from an unusual angle. Zabit Magomed Sharipov and Aljamain Sterling have both hit this in the UFC. The pace choke. This is a modified guillotine choke that Nick Pace invented. It's so rare that it's literally named after the guy who created it. The calf slicer. This attacks the calf muscle and can cause serious damage. It's legal in the UFC, but rarely seen because it requires very specific positioning. Section 4. Decisions when it goes the distance. Not every fight ends in violence. Sometimes it goes to the judges. Unanimous decision. All 3 judges score the fight for the same fighter. This is the most common decision type and usually means one fighter clearly won. Majority decision. 2 judges score for one fighter, 1 judge scores a draw. The fighter with 2 scorecards wins. Split decision. 2 judges score for one fighter, 1 judge scores for the other. These are the controversial decisions that start internet wars and make fans question the judging system. Draw decisions. Unanimous draw. All 3 judges score it a draw. Majority draw. 2 judges score a draw. 1 scores for a fighter. Split draw. 1 judge scores for each fighter. 1 scores a draw. The most famous draw in UFC history is probably Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit, which was so close that nobody could agree who won. Section 5. The weird stuff. Disqualifications and no contests. Sometimes fights end in ways that make you scratch your head. Disqualification, DQ. This is when a fighter gets disqualified for illegal actions. Illegal strikes. The most famous DQ in UFC history is John Jones versus Matt Hamill, where Jones was disqualified for illegal downward elbows. Ironically, this is Jones's only loss on his record. Eye pokes. If a fighter repeatedly pokes their opponent in the eye and the doctor determines the opponent can't continue, it can result in a DQ. Groin strikes. Repeated low blows can lead to disqualification. Fence grabbing. If a fighter repeatedly grabs the fence to avoid takedowns or improve position, they can be disqualified. No contest NC. This is when the fight is declared invalid for various reasons. Accidental fouls. If an accidental eye poke or illegal strike ends the fight before the halfway point of the first round, it's usually ruled a no contest. Failed drug tests. If a fighter tests positive for banned substances, the result can be changed to a no contest. Outside interference. If something happens outside the fighter's control that affects the outcome. Section 6. The ultra-rare finishes. These are the finishes that happen maybe once every few years and make everyone lose their minds. Submission due to strikes. This is when someone gets hurt so badly by strikes that they just give up and tap out. It's incredibly rare because most fighters would rather get knocked out than quit. Retirement between rounds. This is when a fighter tells their corner they can't continue between rounds. It happened to BJ Penn against Frankie Edgar. Penn just sat on his stool and said he was done. Injury TKO. This is when a fighter gets injured during the fight, not from strikes, and can't continue. Kevin Silva once dislocated his shoulder throwing a punch and had to stop fighting. Section 7. The psychology of finishes. Here's what's really interesting. Different types of finishes affect fighters differently. Getting knocked out is traumatic, but it's quick. You don't remember it happening, so mentally it's easier to bounce back from. Getting submitted is different. You feel it happening, you make the conscious decision to tap or risk serious injury. Some fighters never mentally recover from being dominated on the ground. Getting TKO'd by ground and pound is probably the worst. You're conscious the whole time. You know you're getting beaten up and you can't do anything about it. It's demoralizing in a way that knockouts aren't. Section 8. The evolution of finishes. The way fights end has changed dramatically over the years. In the early UFCs, most fights ended in submissions because nobody knew how to defend them. Royce Gracie was submitting guys left and right because they had never seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before. As fighters got more well-rounded, knockout rates went up. Guys like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz were ending fights with strikes because they had good enough takedown defense to keep it standing. Now, in the modern era, finish rates are actually going down because everyone is so well-rounded. Fighters know how to defend submissions, they know how to avoid getting knocked out, and they're in better shape than ever. Section 9. The most spectacular finishes in UFC history. Let's talk about some of the most memorable finishes ever. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 1. Silva was losing for 4.5 rounds, then pulled off a triangle choke with 150 left in the 5th round. The greatest comeback in UFC history. Uriah Hall versus Adam Seller, the spinning heel kick that broke Seller's skull and made Hall famous on The Ultimate Fighter. Gabriel Gonzaga versus Mirko Filipovic, the head kick that knocked out one of the greatest kickboxers in MMA history. Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg 2. Hughes got rocked, picked up Trigg, carried him across the octagon, and slammed him for the knockout. Pure strength and determination. Section 10. The future of finishes. Where are finishes headed in the future? We're seeing more creative submissions as fighters get more technical. The leg lock game has exploded in recent years, with fighters like Ryan Hall and Imanari bringing new techniques to the UFC. Knockout techniques are getting more sophisticated too. Fighters are learning to set up head kicks with punches, and we're seeing more spinning techniques that would have been considered too risky in the past. But the biggest change might be in TKO finishes. As fighters get better at defending, we might see more fights ended by accumulated damage rather than single big shots. Now, so there you have it. Every single way a UFC fight can end, from the spectacular to the bizarre to the downright confusing. The beauty of MMA is that you never know how a fight is going to end. That's what keeps us coming back. Fight after fight, card after card. Every time someone steps into that octagon, they're risking everything for our entertainment. And the least we can do is appreciate the artistry of violence they're putting on display. But here's my question for you. What's your favorite type of finish to watch? Are you a knockout junkie who lives for the highlight reel head kicks? A grappling nerd who gets excited about rare submissions? Or do you love the technical chess matches that go to decision? Drop your favorite finish type in the comments below and tell me about the most memorable finish you've ever seen live or on TV. And while you're down there, hit that like button if you learned something new about the beautiful violence of MMA, and subscribe because we've got more deep dives into fighting techniques coming your way. Also, let me know what aspect of MMA you want me to break down next. Maybe we do a video on the most dangerous techniques that are banned in the UFC, or the craziest comebacks in UFC history. Until next time, keep watching, keep learning, and remember, in the octagon, it's not over until it's over, and it can end in ways you never saw coming.